From the horrible way it smelled to its devastating impact on art and society. Here are 20 things you didn't know about the Black Death. No. 1. The Black Death wasn't actually black. In fact, we don't really know what color the plague was. The name comes from a misreading of a Latin text. In 19th century England, the Black Death was called the pestilence of Justinian. It got its name because it was mentioned by Roman emperor and historian Justinian. However, when English author John of Mandeville wrote about it, he thought the word pestilence referred to a color. He translated the name to the Black Death, even though pestilence means plague or a widespread disease. Number 2. Its first victims were rats. The Black Death was a form of bubonic plague. The disease is caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis. It's usually transmitted by fleas living on rodents like rats. These fleas would then jump onto humans and infect them. The theory goes that plague bacteria came to Europe via trading ships. They arrived on rats that were infested with oriental rat fleas, which had already been infected with plague bacteria. Number 3. Some historians debate whether the Black Death really happened. Some experts believe that the sources that speak of a massive outbreak of plague in the 14th century may be exaggerated or completely false. For example, no skeletal remains have been found with telltale signs of plague. However, most historians agree that there was some kind of pandemic in the Middle Ages. If not in the 1340s, then in the 1660s. It likely occurred in 3 waves. The first one was in the mid-1340s. The second one was around 1360. And the third wave hit in the 1370s. No, for the Black Death killed millions of people. Historians estimate that around 25 million people died of the plague in Eurasia, North Africa, and the Middle East. 60% of the population. That's around 30 to 50 million people today. Death rates varied across regions. For example, in Italy, 40 to 60% of the population died. In England, around half the population perished. But in Germany and Scandinavia, only 10 to 25% of people died. No. 5. People didn't die right away. After being infected, it took about 2 to 7 days for symptoms to appear. The first sign was usually fever, chills, headache, nausea, and fatigue. Victims could also develop painful swellings in their groin, armpits, and neck. Those were the buboes which gave the disease its name. At this stage, the illness was called bubonic plague. If the lymph nodes burst, the bacteria would spread and the victim would die within a few days. Many people did recover at this stage, though treatment involved bloodletting and applying poultices to the buboes. Sometimes people were cured by herbal remedies. However, if the plague bacteria entered the bloodstream, it became pneumonic plague, which was almost always fatal. Number 6. Bodies were thrown into mass graves. The sheer number of casualties meant that normal burial practices couldn't be followed. Mass graves were dug to accommodate the dead. Sometimes bodies were just thrown on top of previous burials. To make matters worse, the corpses often leaked through the ground, contaminating water sources and spreading the plague even further. Number 7. Survivors felt guilty after the plague. Some survivors of the Black Death believed that they had been spared, so they could learn from the mistakes of others and live better lives. Others, though, felt guilty for surviving. They thought that God had abandoned humanity, and they suffered from survivor's guilt. No. 8. The Black Death changed art forever. Before the plague, art was mostly religious. Cathedrals were decorated with paintings and sculptures of saints and biblical scenes. The Black Death led to the rise of secular art, though. Artists started painting everyday life, and people began to question traditional religious views. Some saw the suffering caused by the plague as proof that the church's teachings were wrong. The Renaissance soon followed. Number 9. The flag of Denmark is a reminder of the plague. The Scandinavian country was hit particularly hard by the Black Death. Around a quarter of its population died. The flag of Denmark has a white cross on a red background, which symbolizes both blood and death. When the flag was adopted in the 13th century, it represented courage in the face of danger. However, many believed that the design was inspired by the flag of the dead that flew over ships that had been infected with the plague. Number 10. Flagellants roamed the streets. The flagellants were groups of men who went from town to town during the plague. They carried long whips made of leather and studded with metal. They would walk barefooted, half naked, and covered with blood. Then they whipped themselves as a form of penance for their sins. The flagellants believed that their pain would appease God and stop the plague. Number 11. Doctors couldn't help. Medieval doctors were clueless about how to treat the Black Death. They blamed everything from bad air to imbalances in the four humors, which were thought to be the substances that controlled health. They tried to treat plague victims with mercury, leeching, and applying leeches and covering them in animal fat. Needless to say, these methods didn't work. Number 12. There was a shortage of priests. As the Black Death raged, countless priests died. There weren't nearly enough clergymen to conduct all the funerals. So many people had to wait days or weeks to be buried. The lack of priests also meant that confessionals were abandoned. And instead of last rites, People were given a general absolution. Number 13. Jews were often blamed for the plague. During the Black Death, Jews were frequently accused of poisoning wells and spreading the disease. They were also seen as Christ killers and were subjected to horrific persecutions. In some areas, entire Jewish communities were wiped out by mobs. Number 14. The Black Death led to the decline of feudalism. Feudalism was a system in which land was exchanged for military service. Peasants worked on the land owned by kings, queens, nobles, and the clergy. In exchange, they received protection and some benefits. However, the Black Death led to the end of this way of life. First, many peasants died and there weren't enough workers on the farms. Second, those who survived the plague realized that they were worth more than they thought. Landowners needed them, so they demanded higher wages. By the end of the 14th century, feudalism was finished. Number 15. The plague boosted the economy in some ways. One of the reasons why feudalism ended was because the Black Death led to an economic crisis. The loss of so much labor led to less agricultural production. Prices increased and trade dropped. However, there were some winners. For example, since there were fewer workers, those who still had jobs were able to charge more. The wealthy landowners gained even more power. And the cost of land dropped, making it easier for commoners to own property. Number 16. Life expectancy decreased. Life expectancy is the average age someone is expected to live. Before the Black Death, it was around 35 in Europe. However, after the pandemic, it dropped to 30. The frequent outbreaks of plague in the following centuries also lowered life expectancy. It wasn't until modern times that the average age people lived to increased again. Number 17. Art changed after the plague. As we said before, the Black Death led to a more secular art, but it also affected artistic styles. For example, memento mori became a popular theme in art. Memento mori means remember that you will die. So artists started painting skulls and skeletons as a reminder of the transience of life. Another popular theme was danse macabre, which is French for dance of the dead. These artworks showed skeletons dancing with people of all social classes. Number 18. The Black Death lasted 4 years. Outbreaks of plague continued until the 18th century. In the 1660s, there was another pandemic that killed around 10 million people in Europe. This time, the main victims were young adults between 15 and 35 years old. The disease spread throughout the continent and it was especially deadly in England. Half the population of London died. Number 19. Some people were immune. Not everyone was vulnerable to the Black Death. While it's true that 60% of the population died, some people were completely immune. Scientists believe that immunity was linked to something called the HLA complex. The genes in this region of the genome control our immune system and help us fight off infections. A study found that people who survived the plague had a genetic variant that is linked to better immune responses. However, scientists say that other factors, like the person's age and overall health, also played a role in determining who lived and who died. And no, 20. The world has changed since the plague. The Black Death was a catastrophe. But in some ways, it helped pave the way for modern history. It ended feudalism and created new economic opportunities. It also kicked off the Renaissance, which transformed art, science, literature, and culture. What do you find most interesting about the Black Death? Let us know in the comments and stay tuned for more videos.